I don't think it came up on this one, but I think I learned it on my first trip. And I'm going to butcher it, of course, because it's a Hebrew word, but it's kol beseder. It sort of seems like, in a way, like Hakuna Matata from The Lion King. But it basically means like everything's good, like it's all, like everything's fine, it's all good. I was walking through Jerusalem one day and just totally like fell flat on my face in front of a group of people. And like they called out to me like, is everything okay? But in Hebrew, and I was like, yes. We got to visit the Dead Sea. It's just sort of a surreal experience. If you've ever been swimming, most people have, and then going into the Dead Sea because the salt content is so high, you almost can't sink. One of the goals of Passages is not just to show you the ancient side of Israel, but also show you the modern side and what it's like to live there today. We got to meet a man named Shadi, who is an Aramean Christian living in the north of Israel. He's got this like ancient tie back in the Christian faith, and he's just a great speaker. He's very dynamic, very passionate about what he does. We go to his house and eat so much food, just when you think it's done, another plate of something else comes out. After lunch, he takes you to his church, and it's a beautiful little church, but it's really interesting to hear him talk about the way that his faith and the Christian tradition he comes from sort of stretches back almost 2,000 years directly to the time of Jesus. We got to do a cruise on the Sea of Galilee. The Passages trips are high intensity. You're just kind of like moving from place to place to place. You're going from 8 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. So they're long days, and they get pretty exhausting. But this is just a great opportunity to kind of sit, relax, enjoy. Once you get out on the water, sort of the haziness kind of takes over, and you lose sight of a little bit of the modern cities that are on the Sea of Galilee, and you get to, in a way, see the area as Jesus might have seen it. One of my favorite things that we didn't get to do this time, but I got to do on my first trip, was a dish called shakshuka. It's like a stewed tomato and egg dish. Like the theme of the meals is like there's just way too much to eat. Hummus and bread, and there's salads, but then eventually you get to the main course, and by then you're like, oh, can I keep eating? But of course you can. Israel, in its modern sort of context, is very diverse. People everywhere from Russia to Spain to Ethiopia to South America to other, Iran, and all these different world cultures are mixing in this tiny little country, and you really get, all kinds of different food cultures and traditions that meet in this little area. One of the more dynamic speakers is a scholar named Ben Rice. He's just uncomfortably intelligent, multiple degrees from MIT and Oxford. He talks about why Israel is such a powerhouse with innovation. Israel, at least at one point in the past few years, had been number 3 in technology patents in the world, even though it has a population the size of New York City. And so it's why is this happening? What are the cultural factors behind that? I remember coming away from it going, okay, these are some good things that maybe we can practice here in the States and try to adopt to our lives. It's an ancient site of Masada. It was an ancient hilltop fortress built by Herod, eventually sort of abandoned and then retaken over by the Jews during the revolts in at the end of the first century. And a lot of the excavation's still there, and so walls and things that you get to see. So not only was it really fun for the sort of history nerd in me, but also it's just a beautiful landscapes. Another sort of ancient history thing for me was getting to see the Dead Sea Scrolls this time. They had this really cool building called the Shrine of the Book. It kind of looks like an onion. They're small. They're they're obviously very fragile, smaller than a notebook size piece of fragment. How is it that archaeologists and ancient historians and the people who work on these documents sort of piece them together and understand what it is that these documents say, even when so much of them is missing, and like the dedicated work that takes. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's a little debate, I guess, over like where Jesus was crucified and buried and resurrected. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is sort of like the oldest and I think the most authoritative like source for like where this place is. There are all sorts of funny stories about it because it's shared by multiple like Christian groups, and so there's this ladder on the outside that's not allowed to be moved because the groups can't get together and just like decide where to move it or what to do with it. So it just sits out there uselessly to get a glimpse of the global reality of our church, of getting to see that very different style of worship and the way that it's done by people all over the world. And it converges in a way in this one church was sobering and humbling as well. This was my second chance to go back, and I really loved getting to see other people interact with Israel. I think there's something beautiful about seeing people fall in love with something you love. Our last day there, we talked about what everybody's excited to learn more about when you get home, because it's only 10 days. You barely even scratch the surface of what's available. And so getting to hear from people. So I'm excited to bring Sabbath into my life because we got to do a dinner, the Jewish practice of Shabbat dinner. You know, people are saying like, I need to know more about like, how did the state of Israel come to be? And like, I've heard from Palestinians, I've heard from Jewish Israelis, I've heard from Arab Israelis. And so like I'm trying to figure out this thing, getting to see them go through that same process of, showing up and not knowing what's going on to, 10 days later, having had this experience and now like, okay, well, what do we do now? It's hard to come away from this trip without, finding something that sort of piques your interest and makes you want to keep learning more.